Welcome. God bless you. It's so good to be with you. I hope you're all doing well. I'm excited about this new series. This is the first message in a four-part series throughout the month of March on the land and nation of Israel. As a boy, I grew up in church, and Israel had just declared themselves a nation in 1948, and the pulpits were alive with how significant that was. And we had a lot of good teaching on the fact that Israel was God's time people, God's chosen people, that everything in our Christian faith was inseparably related to the land and to the nation of Israel. In fact, if there were any one word that would prove the divine origin of the Scriptures, of the Word of God, it would be the name Israel, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, those things. And I grew up hearing that. And I remember a lot of that was left in my heart and mind, even when I wasn't walking with the Lord or anything. As I have turned to the Lord, early after I'd committed my life to Christ, began to read the Bible and study the Scriptures, well, it just came alive to me that Israel was just God's endorsement of. Well, first of all, let me say this. I believe that the theme of the Bible, I think you can study the Bible and then draft a theme. You don't have to choose someone else's as you see certain things in Scripture. But the overall theme, I believe, a good one, is the glory of God in the redemption of man. I know I've said that a number of times in different places I've preached, maybe said it on some of the YouTube messages. But the Bible is about the glory of the majesty, the greatness of God in the redemption of man. And God's plan of redemption is through Israel. Everything in our Christian faith is inseparably related to Israel, to its land, to its people, to God's covenants and promises to the Jewish people. I think this series can be a great faith builder for us all. I have studied a lot for this one short message, this introductory message, and I realize we will just scratch the surface of some things about Israel, but I believe they'll be good for us. I know they'll be good for me to strengthen my faith. These are faith builders, these kinds of truths. And that's part of my hope in these YouTube messages, that they'll be faith builders. Maybe even some people come to faith and understand the gospel and get saved, or some people just get assurance of salvation, or others to get that grounded and rooted and established and settled in their faith. And I think that can happen. I know that's happened to me in my own journey of faith. Well, I'm going to use as our launching pad text Genesis chapter 42, and we'll read verses 11 and 13. And let me say this about the book of Genesis. Every Christian will do themselves a great favor if they will familiarize themselves with the book of Genesis. From in the beginning God until these last verses of Genesis, talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the sons. You do yourself a favor, I know, to become very familiar with the truths that are in the book of Genesis. Well, let me read these verses. Now, let me give you the scene. Joseph is now second in command of the nation of Egypt, and he is there by God's design, God's sovereign plan. And his brothers have now come to Egypt to buy food, for the famine was in the land, and they heard there was grain in Egypt. Didn't know anything about Joseph. You remember the account where they had sold him into slavery to some Midianite traders, and they sold him into the house, and the things that Joseph went through, from prison, false accusations, and those things, to now second in command of the nation that's basically ruling the world, Egypt at this time. So they're in an audience for him. He recognizes them. He's dressed like an Egyptian. They don't know him. He's going to speak to them through an interpreter, though he understands every word of their language. He speaks to them through an interpreter. Now, they're standing before him. He's accused them of being spies. And here's their response. Verse 11, Genesis 42:11. We are all one man's sons. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. I want to read verse 13, because it says basically the same thing, but it includes something very significant. And they said, thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not, meaning Joseph. In other words, one has perished. We've lost track of him. I titled this message, One Man's Family. It said, we were all the sons of one man. When I committed my life to Christ in 1978, we were attending a church whose pastor stressed the importance of a good marriage and of a good family, of training your children in the things of the Lord, bringing them up in the nurture and admonition. He had a lot of good conferences for our church and seminars, and he himself spoke strongly on the importance of one man's of your family. And at the beginning of this year, I started out a series of messages on the significance of one, certain numbers through the month of January, but the significance of one. There's one gospel, okay? God did it. It's his gospel. I had nothing to do with it. Israel, one nation. It's God's idea. God did it. The significance of one man's family. Can one man... You see, we can't do anything about our ancestors. We really can't. We didn't choose our parents. But we can do something about our descendants. And this one man, Abraham, is the man. They say they're all the sons of one man, making direct reference to Jacob, who's inseparably related, the son of Isaac, who is the son of Abraham. When the Jewish people describe themselves, they refer to themselves as sons of Abraham, that Abraham was their father, not Jacob, not Isaac. Abraham, this one man. We are all sons of one man. Let me give you some scriptures. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through I think it's 9, let me read these. There was a covenant made by God with one man. His name was Abraham. Chapter 12 of Genesis says, now the Lord had said unto Abram, he had a name change later on, God gave him, but his original name was Abram. He said, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you, and curse them that curse you. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him. And Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. He left the land of Haran. That's where his father and they stopped for a while. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came, and Abram passed through the land unto a place of Shechem. If you know the nation of Israel, Shechem is about the center. So he got in the center of this land that God said, this is the one, this is the place I'm going to give you. And in Shechem, under the oak of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed I will give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. And he removed from there unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Hai on the east. And there he built an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed toward the Negev, which is the southern part of the land of Canaan. It will someday be the land of Israel, because he makes a covenant with him. You do what I do. You go to a land I'll show you, and I'll bless you, and I'll bless those that bless you, and I'll curse those that curse you. So Abram went to the south. Most of his life was probably spent around Hebron, Jerusalem area, which was been the Jebusites at that time, Bethlehem area, because that was the pristine pasture lands. Now they went throughout the land of Canaan. In fact, he later on had him go and stand on a mountain and say, look, every direction when he separated himself from Lot, He said, look to the north, look to the south, east, and the west. He said, as far as you can see, I'm going to give this land to you and to your seed for an inheritance forever. I promise to do this. And your obedience will bring about a blessing on all the nations of the earth. So he made that covenant with him. Abraham is referred to again and again. By the way, Abraham at this time is a Gentile. He's not a Jew. He's not an Israelite. There are no Israelites yet. He is a Gentile. But he's the father of the Israelites. In Luke chapter 3 and verse 8, John the Baptist is addressing the people as he's preaching to the Israelites. He says, don't think to say within yourself, we have Abraham as our father, as meaning that's good enough to get us to heaven. Don't say that. But that's what they would say. Abraham, when Jesus in John chapter 8 is speaking to the Pharisees and the scribes and the religious leaders of his day, here's what he said. He's trying to tell them who he is, Jesus is. And he says, in verse 38 of John 8, I speak that which I have seen with my Father, and you do that which you have seen with your father. They answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus saith unto them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. But they said, we're Abraham is our father. By the way, later on in that chapter, Jesus says, it's getting heated at this particular time, and he says to him in verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And then, you're not yet 50 years old, and you say, have you seen Abraham? I love this. If we had time to build that crescendo, right? He looked at him and said, before Abraham was, I am. And they said, we're going to kill you. You're claiming to be God. Yes. And just Abraham, all they were hanging on to was Abraham as their father. Paul said this in Romans chapter 4, what shall we say then that Abraham our father has found, as pertaining to the flesh, has found? Paul is writing to a Gentile church in Rome this letter and calling Abraham our father, because later on in Romans chapter 4, and I think it's about verse 17, he refers to Abraham as the father of faith, the father of us all, Jew and Gentile. Only one time I found in Scripture where he was ever referred to as Jacob, our father. You know who it was? It was in John chapter 4. Jesus met a woman at the well of Sychar, the well of Jacob in Sychar in Samaria. And a Samaritan woman, a Samaritan was a person that had some Jewish blood in them, but they had a lot of other nationalities in them as well. They couldn't speak classical Hebrew. They were not allowed to worship in any synagogue, and certainly not in the temple. And there was just a real bigotry between Orthodox Jew, and a Samaritan. But Jesus sat by the well of Samaria and said to the woman, dear woman, would you give me a drink? An Orthodox Jew would not, they would go without a drink than to have a drink offered to them in the hand of a Samaritan touch. It was horrible. And Jesus said, Jesus said, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me a drink and I'd give you living water. She said, sir, the well's deep. I see you don't have anything to draw with. Are you greater than our father Abraham, our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself? That's the only person, the only account I could find where Jacob was ever referred to as our father. I believe this woman with some Jewish blood has come back, have been exiled and scattered by the Assyrians. Her generations has come back with the hope that she would one day meet the Messiah. This woman's had a hard life. And meet the Messiah. In fact, when Jesus, they got to talking about where to worship and a number of different things, he got her to the place where she said, well, I know this much. Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will tell us all things. He'll make everything straight. And Jesus said, I that speak to them, his disciples didn't even know who he was yet. When he calms the storm, they're saying, what manner of man is this? So this Samaritan woman, you talk about a covenant with Abraham that all the nations of the world are going to be blessed through this. The first biblical account we have of Jesus ever openly telling someone who he was a Samaritan woman. And I've got off track a little bit there. I love those accounts. Israel. By the way, Jesus had said to her, salvation is of the Jews. And she's wanting so much to be a part of that. I've got to be Jewish to be... No. You don't need to be Jewish to be saved, to become a child of Abraham, a child of faith. Well, the land of Canaan was given to Abraham and to his seed for an inheritance forever. Who gave it to him? God gave it to them. That's very significant. When did the land, they were Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. By the way, they are in Canaan. They hear about food in Egypt. Oh, I'm going to do this quick. Did you know that these guys, all of Jacob's sons were born in Haran, which is northern Mesopotamia, which is on the Euphrates and the Bilka River, lush lands. And he says, leave there now and go to this land that I'll show you. All of them have been hearing about this promised land. None have been born. When God said to Jacob, take off, go to the land of your fathers. He tells his family, we're leaving. He slips out of town in the night, hoping to get to the land before his father-in-law and brothers-in-laws can come, because there's a lot of tension between them at this time. They know they're going to meet Uncle Esau, Jacob's twin, whose last words were, I'm going to kill you. And Jacob says, I'm going to divide the families up. So if he attacks and assaults one, the rest can maybe flee and get away. I mean, this is all these boys that are standing before Joseph have this in their background. That's the promised land. So obviously God does a work of mercy. Esau, they throw their arms around each other, hug and kiss and say, let bygones be bygones. And God lets them into the land. So Jacob now and his sons have been living in the land of Canaan, the land of promise, that God said it's going to be yours and your seeds forever. Famine comes. I don't want to leave this out. I'm going to give you this, and then we're going to wind down and talk about next week's. When did Jacob become Israel and these sons now Israelites? When did that happen? In Genesis chapter 32. In Genesis 32, I had my marker in this one, but a little bit quicker. Listen to this scene. I can give it to you. So many of you are familiar with this. He's on his way to meet his brother. He wrestles with an angel of the Lord, with a man of God. He wrestles with God. And the angel of God said to him, let me go, the day is breaking. And he touched Jacob in the and his hip bone came out of socket, horribly painful. And yet he wouldn't let go. He said, let me go. He said, I won't let you go till you bless me. He said, what is your name? The last time somebody asked him his name was his father, and he lied to him and said, I'm Esau, your firstborn. That lie tormented this man of God for years, the whole time he was in Haran. And he said, my name is Jacob. He said, not anymore. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, which means strove with God and prevailed. Nobody wrestles with God and wins unless God in his sovereign design and his plan enables him to survive that encounter. He said, you're now Israel. You're a nation. You're a people now. You've got an identity. You're in the land, but it's not your land yet. But it will be someday, your seed. All these boys have experienced this. They've heard about the covenant God had made with their grandfather with their grandfather Isaac, and with their great-grandfather Abraham. This has been passed on one man's family. What's about to happen in this Egypt encounter? And next week we're going to talk about the mysteries of Egypt. Why is there an Egypt in this? They're going to go in a family, these boys and their families, and in 400 years, they'll be 3 million strong. There'll be a nation still not in the land. The land's not theirs yet. But the promise is it will be. The wonders of God performed there. The Exodus, the possessing, and all the blessings. Well, I think there's a lot we can learn from looking at God's hand and His plan in the life of this one man's family. And we can look and see God's hand in our own lives. In Romans 15:4 it says, "And the things which were written in earlier time were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." I'll close with this. Until then, in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 12, Paul is writing to a totally Gentile church. Ephesus is in Asia. It's a seaport city on the Aegean Sea. It is Gentile. And here's what he says to them. "Remember that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel." Commonwealth. The wealth that we as believers in the common faith have in Israel. And strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope without God in this world. But God, I love that. But God, you who were far off, hath He made near by the blood of Christ. All those things become precious to us. Well, God bless you.